Okay, well, it's the magic time of 6 p.m., and I am so happy to see so many folks in attendance tonight, given our snafu with the Zoom link. I apologize sincerely for that. I don't feel that the tech gods are with me today, so I'm hoping for no more incidences, but please bear with us if we do have any upsets. Um,
Oh,
if you don't mind, go ahead and put your microphones on mute. That would help me focus on my little preamble that I need to give to you all before we can introduce tonight's speaker. By the way, we are going to record tonight's presentation so that we can upload it to our YouTube page later. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the record button now. We're also streaming live to Facebook Live. So if you are unable to join us here on Zoom to put your questions in the chat, I will pop over to Facebook during the presentation and look for questions there.
As you go farther north, things have settled down in half.
Okay. All right. So thank you for joining us for tonight's presentation, Texas Bound, the Syrian-Lebanese Life in the Lone Star State. I am Christy Peliquin, the Development Manager for the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. In spite of our Zoom snafu, we're so glad you could be here. We also wanted to encourage you to get to know more about us and our mission to support the Texas Historical Commission. So we invite you to visit our website. And let me just pop a mute on some accounts here so that we can hear. Our website is thcfriends.org, and we would love for you to check out more about what we do. We are the nonprofit partner to the state agency, the Texas Historical Commission. In that capacity, we do fundraising for projects all across the state. It might be a capital campaign for a new museum, or it might be for programming such as the virtual events program that you are a part of tonight. Whatever there's not enough funding coming through the state legislature for that THC would like to work on, that's where we come in. And you all, when you give donations to us, you are a part of helping us realize all of the programs and projects that the Texas Historical Commission does every year. And it's a lot. I do want to say thank you to those of you who've donated through these virtual events. Please know we see every dollar, whether it's $5 or $500, they all matter, and we're so grateful for each and every one. So thank you.
no.
I also wanted to,
Sweetie.
let me pop some mutes on here. All right, I also wanted to welcome our THC commissioners, friends, board members, as well as some of our colleagues at the Texas Historical Commission who are here with us tonight. We are always glad to see you, and thank you for being here. If you haven't already followed us on social media, please do. This is one way that you can connect with us and learn about future events, like our next virtual event, which is coming up very quickly on May 8th. It's called How Did We All Come Here? A Glimpse into the Houston Asian American Immigration Experience. And this will be presented by Ann Chow of the Houston Asian American Archives. Very much looking forward to that presentation and hope you can join. Please register via our website. So, a little housekeeping before we introduce tonight's speakers. As I've mentioned, if you can keep your microphones on mute, that just helps me focus on what I have to say, and it helps our presenter focus on her presentation. So I may be muting your microphone for you if I'm hearing a lot of noise, so just know that. While the presentation is going on, I'm going to prompt you all to put your questions for our speaker into the chat. And then when she's done presenting, we'll get to as many of those questions as we can before 7:30 hits and we all turn into pumpkins. So please do put questions in the chat for our speaker, and we will get to those first come, first served as soon as she's done presenting. And then I also wanted to let you know that tomorrow, everyone who is registered for tonight's event will receive an email with a link to a recording of tonight's event, as well as any resources that the presenter might mention tonight, such as a website or a book. We will include links to those in my email when I send the follow-up tomorrow, so you don't have to try to rush and take notes tonight. Okay, that's a lot of talking. It's now my privilege to introduce our presenter for this evening. I did want to mention that our original presenter is unable to join us tonight, but we are joined by Lindsay Waldenberg, and we are very excited to have Lindsay. Lindsay is the Director of Research with the Kairala, and Lindsay, please, I know I'm not saying these names correctly, so please correct me. Center for Lebanese Diaspora Studies. In this role, Lindsay manages the center's public history projects, oral history initiatives, educational programming, scholarly awards,
Odd.
conferences, grant
So
efforts.
Akram's not doing this?
Akram was not able to be here tonight for personal reasons, so we are joined by Lindsay. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to finish introducing Lindsay. Also, as part of the role that Lindsay manages, she also is involved with the Journal of Middle Eastern and North African Migration Studies, which is the center's self-published open access digital journal. She holds a dual BA in History and Art History and Archaeology from Washington University in St. Louis, as well as an MA in Public History from Texas State University in 2017. She is currently a PhD student in the Public History program at North Carolina State University. Lindsay, we are delighted to have you, and we're so glad that you could fill in for Akram tonight. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Yes, Akram sends his regrets, and I know that he wished he could be here, but I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much to everyone here for tuning in, and thank you, Christy, and thank you to everyone at the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission for having us. This opportunity is very near and dear to my heart. I used to live in Austin, and maybe you heard that I am a Bobcat. I'm an alum. I was thinking if I was going to do the symbol, but my hands don't work that way. And I actually did my internship with the Texas Historical Commission many years ago. So please know that here at the Chirala Center, we are big fans of all of the work that the THC does. So thank you. All right. So today I'm proud to share Texas Bound, which is a multi-part project we released a couple of years ago that explores the rich history and experiences of Syrian and Lebanese immigrants and their descendants in the Lone Star State. I'll offer an overview of the history and the settlement patterns of these Syrian-Lebanese families in Texas, as well as introduce the project's different components. There's definitely going to be a lot more to explore after the fact. And so thank you, Christy, for in advance for sharing the links, because there's definitely things that I hope you will check out and explore in depth. And then we'll have time for questions and answers. And of course, I would love to hear your own histories and stories if any of you are willing to share. Christy gave us a brief introduction about myself. I'm the Director of Research at the Chirala Center, and we started in 2015. We are an endowed center with North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. And what we do is we promote, oh, you know what? I should start my slideshow. Pardon me. I got so caught up and so excited that I didn't even,
I was right there with you. I was also very excited. So no
just
problem.
ready to go. And as much as, maybe I think everybody get tired of looking at my face after a minute. Okay, so here's my title page. All right. So a little bit about the Chirala Center. So what we do is we're dedicated to preserving and sharing and promoting research and supporting research about Lebanese immigration to the United States and throughout the world. And this is really including most recently our Central and South America, which has been very exciting for us. So we preserve and share that information with the scholarly community and the general public through a number of different projects, and we just try to build connections and things like that. So I have a quick, brief, fun video that just gives you an overview of who we are and what we do. We tested the sound earlier, and for this one, it's a little choppy. So I think I muted it, but if I didn't, apologies in advance. So here we go.
And Lindsay, this video just had music and no talking. That's right. That's
Correct.
right.
Yes.
Okay.
So please feel free to fill in with your favorite song.
That's wonderful images, though.
Yes, so we have one thing what we didn't do or didn't mention is that we have a huge archive that is growing all the time. And actually, we very generously just received a very lovely gift from Jimmy Nassor and his wife Dina that we announced earlier this month to fund the archive and its expansion and rename it as the Nassor Family Archive. And I'll speak more about that because has huge Texas connections. All right. So that's that. And we will have a couple more videos and those have sound. Let me pause this and do in fact sound good. So let's begin our story. And we'll begin in Balad al-Sham, which is what is known as Greater Syria. And this is the area that encompasses the lands that we know today as Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. And so between 1880 and 1914, nearly 300,000 individuals, which was about 30% of the population there, came to the Americas. Of those, over 90,000 came to the United States, and with about 1,600 settling in Texas. So that's a lot of people. And before we dive into, Texas life and things like that, we should consider why Syrian migrants left Balad el-Sham and came to the United States. A variety of reasons, as there are for anybody who is migrating, but the big reason was economic. So the area's economic conditions in the late 19th century were rapidly deteriorating, and there were just fewer opportunities. And this was for a number of reasons. A big reason was the collapse of the silk trade in the 1860s and the 1870s. In the Mount Lebanon area, which is central Lebanon and Beirut, a little bit of Tripoli, I think, all the way to Tripoli. The area the silk industry was how folks made money. And in the 1860s and the 1870s, silks from China and Japan started coming in, and obviously that competition drove prices down, drove the supply up, and drove demand down, and sadly caused a lot of people to lose their livelihoods. Along with that, the Ottoman Empire, which Balad al-Sham was a part, suffered a major economic crash in 1878 due to a combination of different political and economic factors, which worsened these already existing problems. On top of that, there were droughts and floods and famine, and so the currency's value just dropped significantly, and people left to gain economic stability. And here's a great image from the Library of Congress of just folks working with in the silk industry. So another factor is that in the late 19th century, Beirut became an important transportation hub for steamships, which made international travel easier and cheaper. And so this image here shows lines of immigration for those traveling from Greater Syria. And I want to point out that you see some terminal lines here. For example, we see a direct line from Liverpool, from Genoa, Naples, Marseille, things like that. I want to point out that it's not really that a migrant's journey had many legs. It was often for a migrant to come from Beirut to Marseille, perhaps to Liverpool, be stuck there for a while, and then move on. It wasn't necessarily a one and done journey. It wasn't necessarily a straight shot from one point A to point B. Um, and it was possible for people to migrate to more than one place and live there a while and move on. So it's important to think that crossing borders is a multi-way process, um, and a very dynamic process, and people cross borders multiple times and go back and forth. So beyond that, beyond Beirut being a transportation hub, there are other major events happening. Of course, for example, World War One. World War One interrupted major transportation routes in the area, which caused another famine in 1915 and 1918, as food could not be shipped to different parts of Greater Syria, and 200,000 out of 400,000 individuals died. So we're really looking at economic factors. Interestingly, the social factors were less pressing than the political or the economic reasons. Um, in that sense, people would migrate for different individualized reasons, whether pursuing greater education, seeking to reunite with family, things like that. And the idea of oppression and religious sectarianism wasn't really a driving factor for the immigration in this period. I mean, again, we're talking about 1880-ish to 1930, give or take. Okay, so most people who left were those who were living comfortably, and they had enough savings to finance their trips. And most people believed that they would come back eventually. So now I want to talk about crossing the border. Border crossing itself is treacherous, whether through the physical journey or the checkpoints themselves. It wasn't a guarantee that immigrants would gain entry into the United States. There were two major routes for immigration, from Beirut to Marseille in France to New York, and that's mostly through Ellis Island. And the other way was the southern way, Mexico to Texas, or through Texas ports like Galveston. Half of the Syrians who were naturalized in Texas came through New York, whereas a quarter of those who were naturalized in Texas came through Texas ports or Mexico. But today we're going to really focus on crossings at the southern border, Mexican border. And so here are just a couple of news articles that I think are pretty illuminating and touch on some of the themes that I will talk about now. Some things never change. And so inspectors and translators at the Mexican border held stereotypes of those who were trying to come into the United States. Nativism was huge at this time, and nativist sentiment associated immigrants, particularly those who were considered non-white, with disease, thinking that these diseased people would come in and physically and symbolically pollute the healthy body of the United States. So this is clearly based in white supremacist thought. So for example, in 1893, there was the Health and Hygiene Act, which required that ships must receive clean bills of health, disclose their sanitation history, and submit weekly reports. This is all based on the idea of stemming the flow of disease into the United States. So, oh, that was just my echo. A reason that a number of migrants sought to enter the U.S. through Mexico, through the Mexican border, were rumors that health screenings were laxer in Mexico rather than in other places like Ellis Island. But there was substantial fear and paranoia about disease entering the country. In particular, there was this fear that Syrian immigrants would bring in trachoma, which at the time was kind of regarded as this Mediterranean disease. And it was, without basis, associated with Syria. And let's see, lost my notes. Here we go. And trachoma is a contagious eye disease that can cause blindness, and if caught early on is curable. In reality, very few with trachoma were turned away from the border, or very few who came to the border had trachoma, and of course, those who were turned away were not offered any medical care. Beyond this conception, inspectors and translators regarded Syrians as subversive. So, for example, there's accounts where Syrians were accused of dressing as Mexicans so that they could cross the border surreptitiously, but of course, not considering the fact that there were Syrian communities in Mexico and Syrians were living in Mexico, and perhaps they were buying and wearing the clothes that were available in Mexico. Moreover, there were moral dimensions to border discrimination. For women, there were Orientalist stereotypes relating to female sexuality, which hampered women's attempts to enter as well. And on top of all of that, there are the legislative challenges as well, the legal challenges. So we have the Johnson-Reed Act, or the Immigration Act of 1924, which established a quota that heavily favored immigrants from Northern and Western Europe, and restricted those from Southern and Eastern Europe, and of course, banned those from Asia. For those from Syria, this quota was capped at 100 people per year, 100. Before this, if you remember our numbers, we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands coming over here to the United States, an average around 4,500 per year. So it was a very dramatic decrease in the immigration. Okay. And so now that we know why people left and what challenges they faced while doing so, we should consider why so many Syrians moved to Texas. Between the 1870s and the 1930s, 1,600 migrants ended up in Texas for two main reasons: job opportunities and the proliferation of existing communities. So these images here that you see, they show the dramatic growth of the Syrian-Lebanese population in Texas between 1900 and 1930. And you can see it's a color gradient. So for 1930, the red are the hot spots where the population is more concentrated. And you can see, those are where the existing communities were. So people were drawn to join where people already were living. And there are more maps like this on our digital project, which we'll send the link out later on, that show the extent of this growth as well. So let's talk about jobs. As we learned, Syrian immigrants went to the United States to escape the economic devastation in Balad al-Sham. At this time, the United States was enjoying a very healthy, growing economy due to rapid industrialization. And this industrialization created a huge amount of jobs and a huge need for labor. So different states began to recruit people to come work. And that includes Texas. And so here's just a graph. And for Texas, the Texas Bureau of Immigration, and along with later private businesses, were recruiting people to come and work and replace the freedmen labor lost after the Civil War. In addition, Texas was trying to settle West Texas, especially after the expulsion of the indigenous populations there. And in fact, the Texas Bureau of Immigration issued pamphlets in multiple languages encouraging people to come. And they did. People came. It was people who were mostly considered part of the lower or working classes, though there were a small number of highly educated immigrants who had been taught in missionary-founded institutions in Greater Syria, such as what is known as the American University of Beirut in Beirut today. So it was this combination of networks and word of mouth that pushed people to settle, because in these institutions like AUB, missionaries were talking about the United States, and of course, word of mouth, information is shared. People hear good things. So most Syrians in Texas worked as peddlers, industrial factory workers, merchants, or other itinerant workers. Groceries were a huge industry as well. So these two photos here show different Syrian families with their businesses, one of whom is in Canadian town in the Texas Panhandle, and then the other one in Wichita Falls. And the cool thing about this is that the photo from Wichita Falls of the Abusi store was loaned to us courtesy of the family. And that has been a really big joy in working on this project, is just working with different families and getting to hear their stories from all over, from east to west, Texas, north to south, and seeing some of the treasures that they have. And so it's been a joy to just be able to highlight that. By 1900, 92% of Syrians working in Texas peddled or were working in stores like grocery stores. Um, I do want to point out the inaccuracy of what we call the peddler myth, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, and it's this idea that Syrian immigrants arrived in the United States without a penny in their pocket, and they traveled all over with their cachets and their carts and worked really hard and saved money, and opened their own stores and became economically prosperous. And that did happen. But in reality, the census data shows that yes, peddlers were there, but that is not what every Syrian-Lebanese first generation person did. And it certainly did not last for years and years. Really, peddling dramatically decreased from 1900 to 1940, with most Syrians working in a variety of other industries like agriculture, professionals, teachers, religious, trades, even entertainment. And as another nod to the family here, immigrant businesses were a family affair. Families often lived in the back rooms of their stores, and children often worked at the sales counter when they weren't at school. And I remember this great quote from an oral history where someone said, "As soon as we were old enough to touch the cash register, we were put to work." And I think that just kind of encompasses all the attitudes there. So next, I want to just highlight a couple of specific families here. And these families, their stories, they're featured on our digital project. This is just one of two of many. So again, I encourage you to go to explore some more. And I'd be curious to know, maybe you can put in the chats if you know this family, if you're a member of this family or something, because I would love to hear that. So the first up is the Azar family. So in 1907, Shibli Azar, he began a small business selling pecan candy in El Paso. And the business really became into its own as a nut company during World War I, when the business began selling nuts to soldiers at Fort Bliss. By the 1930s, Azar Nuts processed its own nuts for distribution under its own brand, as well as for other retailers and grocery chains. Shibley's sons took control of the company in the 1940s, and while it was sold to Consolidated Foods in 1970, the family bought it back in 1975. And by the time it was sold for good, in 1986, it was the country's third largest nut processing company. And then the next one is the Hagar family. And you'll have to forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. Maybe y'all are familiar with this. Spoiler alert, they're still selling pants today. I looked them up. There are plenty of stores where you can get your pants. But this business was started by John Marion Hagar, and he left Lebanon at the age of 14 to visit relatives in Mexico. And when he was working his way back, he was going back home, he stopped in New Orleans and decided to stay. And so soon he landed in Dallas, and in 1925 he began making slacks. The Hagar Company became famous because they really revolutionized the clothing industry by applying like assembly line production to creating pants and selling those at a single price, which was 5 cents. When John Marion died in 1987, the company was the largest privately owned clothing manufacturer in the United States, and it's still open and selling clothes today. A fun fact I learned that, well, when I was looking this up, is that past advertising models include John Travolta, Steve Martin, Mickey Mantle, and Arnold Palmer. So again, if you have personal relations or anything, please share. Or if you happen to be a pants model too, please share. I'm joking. Okay. Specific here. So the first one we'll look at is Beaumont. And here again, you see some maps. This is all drawn from census data, tracing the growth of the Syrian-Lebanese population and families in that town from 1910 through 1930. And this is the case for the communities that I will briefly touch on, but there are more maps, etc., online for you to explore. So by 1900, there were at least 3 Syrian immigrants in Beaumont. Their names were Christ Angelo, Abdu Bosby, and Mike Salim. And they all operated food stands along the town's commercial district on Pearl Street. Each had previously lived and worked in different Texas towns, but like Houston and Brenham, but they came and settled in Beaumont. And after 1901, with the discovery of the oil at Spindletop, thousands flocked to Beaumont for a chance to earn money. And as entrepreneurs formed hundreds of new oil companies, many people, including Syrians, came to seek employment in those companies and set up businesses to support and serve those companies. So interesting, at this time, Beaumont became an official destination for many incoming immigrants arriving at Ellis Island and southern ports of entry. It was listed as their destination. So while the U.S. Census registered no Syrians in Beaumont in 1900, by 1910 it had the largest Syrian population in Texas. The majority of Syrians lived in the northwest of the town center, around Long Avenue, and the Syrian community referred to this area as the Hara, which is Arabic for neighborhood. Most residents were Antiochian Orthodox, and as early as 1898 had formed a Syrian Orthodox society that eventually established itself as St. Michael Antiochian Orthodox Church, and we'll hear more about that church a little later on. Next up, we have Houston. Houston, huge important center of commerce and industry in Texas, and it drew a very large Syrian community. So Houston experienced significant population growth in the latter half of the 19th century, especially in the wake of Spindletop and the oil discovery near Beaumont in 1901. By 1900, there were 11 Syrian households in Houston, which was the largest community at the time, again, 1900. And they lived along Wood Street in Montgomery, near the railroad, and a bridge connecting Fifth Ward to the major commercial center of Buffalo Bayou. This community continued to grow and spread, and by 1930, Houston had a Syrian population of nearly 500. Of course, as many of y'all probably know and maybe have attended, Syrian-Lebanese population continues to be very thriving in Houston today. Every year, Houston hosts a Lebanese festival. We at the Chiral Center attended last year's festival. We had a fabulous time, and I really hope that we get to attend again in the future. All right, next up we have Austin. Austin's Syrian community was concentrated on East 6th Street and East Avenue, which was the major thoroughfare that existed prior to the construction of I-35. And in 1928, Austin's master plan mandated that all non-white residents, mostly African American and Hispanic residents, had to live in East Austin. So by 1930, you can kind of see on this map on the right, the Syrian population was really on either side of East Avenue, which again became that I-35 corridor, with as many residents living east as west of the street. So speaking of Austin, I want to take this time to highlight another component of our Texas Bound project. This is a documentary entitled Herb Nassour, the People's Doctor. And Herbert Nassour Jr., who's born in Lockhart in 1917, I believe. And he spent his life seeking to provide affordable health care for the marginalized in Texas. He established community hospitals in Hamilton, Garland, Austin, and El Paso, all dedicated to bringing affordable health care to the poor and needy. But his efforts at introducing universal health care, which means like small fees for procedures, providing free care for those who couldn't afford it, drew some resistance from local doctors, the Texas Medical Association, and the growing health insurance business. And so this documentary explores his story. And as I mentioned earlier with the our archival gift, we recently renamed our archive, and it is the Hoda Nassour and Herbert Nassour Jr. Archive of Lebanese Diaspora. So it's renamed in honor of him and his wife Hoda. And so I'd like to play this brief trailer for you. And the documentary is freely available on YouTube. I think it's a dynamic story. So we'll just watch this trailer. It's just about a little less than 2 minutes, or over 2 minutes.
Texas, a white town. His skin color was different. I don't know that he ever went in the front door anywhere. He always had to go in the back. You know, he couldn't just knock on the door and kick the door. He had to bang the door.
He was just not another doctor. He was a Lebanese liberal in the world of medicine.
The providers in a community would set prices for services.
People were excluded from accessing medical care when they were in dire needs and sometimes left to die.
That had a tremendous impact. He never forgot that. He wanted to make medical care as common as a cup of coffee. You would think something that was a solution would be well received, but he struck a nerve. He charged less.
Delivering a baby was 3,000 to 5,000. Dad was charging 400 to 500. He wanted to show everybody you can provide good medical care at a reasonable price wherever it needed to be. He had me believing that everybody should be able to afford medical. Dad was a good physician. So as small as he was still a threat. There were false accusations being made. The hospital was shut down.
It was front page news.
They did not like that he could provide the same medical care at a fraction of the cost that they were providing here.
Yeah, they just didn't want him in there.
Just couldn't win.
He was my hero. He could do no wrong.
He was not perfect and he was not a saint.
He pretty much was the lonely crusader.
Maverick, a boxer.
He's human.
He was somebody you can't forget, that's for sure.
Right. So again, please check that out on YouTube. Now back to our overview of different communities. Next, I just want to briefly turn to San Antonio. In San Antonio, the Syrian community lived in close proximity to the city's Italian enclave. And like the majority of Syrian merchants in urban Texas, most in San Antonio sold produce and lived near the market. And the community was concentrated in a 6-block radius of where all the produce would come into the city. In 1950s, the construction of I-35 forced much of the community to relocate, and after continued development in 1970s, the neighborhood was completely displaced. And then finally, looking at El Paso. So the experience of Syrian immigrants in El Paso was very much shaped by its position as a border community and its close relationship with Juarez. And while El Paso maintained one of the largest Syrian communities between 1900 and 1930, its population soared to surpass that of Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and Beaumont between 1920 and 1930. So at this point, by 1930, the newest arrivals, people newly arriving in the United States from French Mandate Lebanon, were more likely to live in El Paso than anywhere else in Texas. Until 1910, the Syrian community was concentrated on South El Paso Street, where most residents made a living selling produce. And by 1920, many residents had moved north and east of this area and were more evenly dispersed throughout the town by 1930. So you can see again, with the concentration of the dots, there's more even spread there. So that's a little bit about these different communities, but of course, despite its different geographic locations, there were certainly some shared experiences and shared anchors. And so I'd like now to talk just a little bit about two aspects of community life here. And the first one being faith. So Ottoman Syria was a very religiously diverse region and home to Muslim, Christians, and Jews. Within those groups, there were different sects, so Sunni, Shia, and Druze for Muslims, and then Maronite, Melkite, Antiochian Orthodox, and Presbyterian among the Christians. In Texas, churches anchored social life and they offered advice and resources to newly arrived immigrants who were seeking to settle in the area. Really, churches functioned as these networks, connecting people, again, sharing resources, and oftentimes there would be itinerant priests who would move from church to church, move between churches. But in the beginning, when Syrian and Lebanese immigrants were first arriving in the state, the population wasn't quite enough to support resident religious leaders and houses of worship for their own. So immigrants and their descendants often joined other denominations. So Maronites would often join local Roman Catholic churches, and Antiochian Orthodox Christians would often join Eastern Orthodox or Episcopal churches. And these two photos here are depicting St. Michael's Church. And St. Michael's Church, which I mentioned earlier, is in Beaumont. And it's the first Syrian Orthodox church in the state of Texas. It was built in 1907. After that, more began to pop up in Texas, such as St. Elias in Austin and St. George's Orthodox Church in El Paso in the 1950s. So, along with being an anchor, churches were offered Syrian-Lebanese families a chance to connect with their home communities. Here they got to celebrate rituals and hear languages that they really didn't hear very frequently elsewhere in Texas. And in a way, too, churches acted as ambassadors to the local community as well, writ large. So for local townships, often hosting different cultural events that would showcase aspects of Syrian-Lebanese culture. At this point, I want to play a little bit of an oral history that we did with Ruth Ann Scaff, whom many of you may know, whose father worked at St. Michael's Church in Beaumont. This is one of many oral histories that we conducted for the project, which really allowed this project to just have so much rich detail and personality and intimacy. So we really enjoyed it. We are in the process of putting up all of these oral histories that we conducted for the project, and this is over, gosh, maybe nearly 20, that we're in the process of putting them online in our archives. So hopefully those will be accessible for y'all to watch in their entirety soon. But in the clip that I'm about to share, she talks about when a fire broke out in the church. So here we go.
My father was assigned there in the early 50s when I was, very young. And as a little girl, I knew Father Nicholas Nahas, who served in Beaumont, but was also a missionary or a traveling priest. I knew his lovely wife, who when the church burned down in Beaumont, when we were living there, I think we stayed with her for a while. It was Mother's Day. And I remember the little white organza dress with red polka dots, and the flouncy skirt and the bow tie in the back. I was coming down the parish house. The rectory was an apartment above the church hall, and right next to the church. So the wind was blowing so strongly from the church to the wooden parish hall and apartment that I was just literally coming down the steps to go to Sunday school. One of the men ran up the steps, and my mother had a baby on her hip, and me and my, Reddy, she had a ratty old bathrobe on, and said, Mrs. Scaff, you hurry, the church is on fire. And so my poor mother had to come out, in a bathrobe, and with the baby and me. And I remember standing on the sidewalk, and my father, big billowing black smoke coming out of the front doors of the church, and my father kept running back in there to get, to get the sacred items out of the church. And but the church burned down, and thank God nobody was hurt. It was right before services started and everything, and they rebuilt. My father was assigned there in the.
All right. So the other big pillar of community life would be clubs. In the 1910s and the 1920s, Syrian Americans began forming different associations, ethnic clubs, societies, and sports teams as a way to socialize and formulate a Syrian American identity. Oftentimes there was crossover between business associations and religious life, as business people would financially support religious institutions and help fund constructions of different churches and things like that. But really, these clubs were the secular civic counterpoint to the churches in that religious aspect. In the 1930s, in Texas, a network of clubs began to form through sports tournaments, excuse me. These clubs included the Goodfellows Club of Tyler and the Syrian American Club of Dallas. But really, it was the Young Men's Amusement Club of Port Arthur, which was later renamed Limonar, and you see the softball team there. And the Syrian Girls Friendly Club of Austin that led efforts to create what is now the Southern Federation of Syrian-Lebanese American Clubs. So the Syrian Federation of Syrian-Lebanese American Clubs, which was known as the Southern Federation of Syrian Clubs until 1938, was founded on July 4th, 1931. The Young Men's Syrian Association and the El Awanis Club of Beaumont hosted the first Southern Federation Convention in 1932. At the time, the Federation consisted of 9 clubs, 7 of which were in Texas. And today, the Federation is huge, and it spans from the southeast to California and comprises at least 85 clubs, and is still very active, hosting annual meetings every year, I believe on the 4th of July weekend, to celebrate its founding. And the Federation continues to serve the needs of the Lebanese American community. So along with the clubs, the Federation offers assistance to those in needs and other opportunities like educational scholarships. And this forms another significant component of our Texas Bound project. Is we were fortunate enough, our archive, to acquire the Southern Federation of Syrian Lebanese American records. And so we have thousands and thousands of documents from the Federation, spanning from its founding in the early 1930s through, contemporary times. And these are great. I mean, we have pamphlets from different programming from different towns all over Texas, from Tyler, from Beaumont, from even beyond Texas as well. But they're really fun to look at. And there are meeting minutes and constitutional amendments and really a lot of great resources. They are all digitized and all freely available for you to look at on our archives website. So just incredibly rich resource, incredibly rich historical treasure trove of items. So I hope y'all will take a look there as well. Okay. So that about wraps it up for me for just talking a little bit about, the Syrian Lebanese in Texas. But there is more to explore. As I mentioned, we do have our digital project that really kind of covers what I talked about today, but in more depth. We have our documentary as well, which I mentioned. We also have a podcast that it's a four episode podcast that looks at the experiences of those immigrating from Balad el-Shem to Texas. And it focuses very much on crossing borders and some of the challenges that we talked about today, like racism and the idea of disease and just controlling the body and things like that. It's a fantastic series. So those are freely available to listen to as well. And for our archive, we have our Southern Federation records that I mentioned here. We are in process and hope to have soon the collection of our oral history recordings, those transcripts that I mentioned, as well as the Nessor family papers. And those, again, are related to Herbert Nessor, the gentleman, the documentary I mentioned. That link there will take you to all the different sources and citations that I referenced in this presentation. But really, that's about it. Of course, I want to thank y'all so much for your attention and your time as you listen to this, and I hope again that you'll share your stories. And I'm eager to hear your questions and your comments. And, please feel free to reach out to me after the fact. Again, my name is Lindsay Waldenberg. That's my email right there. It's ldwalden@ncsu.edu. And our website is lebanesestudies.ncsu.edu. So you'll find all of this and much, much more there. So thank you again. And I'll turn it over to Christy.
Thank you, Lindsay. And for those of you who are frantically trying to write down this information, just know that I will be including this in the follow-up email that I'll send tomorrow. It might be tomorrow afternoon. Give me a bit. I will also include a link to the recording of tonight's presentation. I know some of you had to join a little bit late and you were very disappointed not to see the beginning. I understand. This is a really wonderful presentation. So please watch for that email from me tomorrow. And if you don't get it from me, I'm putting my email into the chat right now. Feel free to send me an email and bother me anytime. I would love to hear from you and happy to help you. Okay, so we have some questions, Lindsay. So I'm going to start from the beginning, go all the way back to the top. In that first map that you were showing about with Texas and it had the little hot spots,
Yeah.
somebody was asking, what is the hot spot that's just southwest of Houston? I was actually going to pull up a map and see if I could tell what that was, but I'm not able
In
to tell.
oh, well, my geography is not that's is not perfect. Um, I mean, I'm assuming that is Beaumont in East Texas there.
Yeah, I'm thinking that too.
Um, yes.
Okay,
And I
we'll go
forgot
with
to,
that.
yes, yes. And I forgot to mention, not that this is important, that I found my cat in Beaumont. So I have close ties. Just kidding.
Beaumont has a rich history that
It does.
I am still discovering more and more, and you just added a whole nother layer to my understanding of Beaumont tonight, and I'm just I'm so delighted to be educated about Beaumont. Another question that we had was regarding Levant. So isn't you guys, I am so sorry about my pronunciation of things. Please, I'm giving it my best effort, but please know that I'm just not very good at pronouncing these names. But the question is, isn't Balad al-Sham also known in English as Levant?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then do you have any records of Syrians going back to Thurber, Texas? Have you heard of Thurber, Texas?
I have heard of Thurber, Texas. Not that I have encountered again, but I am sure there are. Um, you know, like I said, for this presentation or really this project, we focused a lot on these bigger population centers. But of course, there were you know, Syrians in other places like Wichita Falls and other towns in West Texas. I'll have to look into that and to see if we find anything in particular. Um,
Debbie, are you with us still? Do you want to come off mute and maybe talk about why you're interested in Thurber particularly?
I am here, and thank you so much for putting the
Sure.
presentation together. It's absolutely fabulous. I work at Tarleton State University, and I also work with the W.K. Gordon Center in Thurber, Texas. And I asked the question. It was sort of a multi-level question. A lot of the people who came to Thurber actually came from Italy and different European countries when times were hard, and they moved into Thurber, which was a company town in northern Erath County, to get involved in coal mining and brick making, and very much in industry. And the fact that you don't have records of Syrians actually helps me, because if they had money and means to come to Texas, it would not make sense for them actually to move into a company town and work in those conditions. It would make more sense for them to go somewhere and work independently or in an open environment. So you just actually confirmed a suspicion I had. Thank you very much.
Oh, sure, sure. And, you know, again, if there's, that's all fascinating. Thank you. And, you know, to you and anyone, please, if you're curious about specific communities or anything, please email me and we can dive into it together.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It was great to hear you and what you're thinking about with your work. Thank you for coming
Thank
off
you.
mute. Yeah. Roy is asking, were the majority of the 1600 who came to Texas Christian? And this was earlier on in your presentation.
Yes, yes, yes. The majority of those who came to Texas were Christian, yes. And the majority of those who immigrated were Christian as well in general.
And then we actually have somebody who's joining us from El Paso. So when you mentioned El Paso, and I'm trying to find Mac Lamia, I know that's probably not your first name. Do you want to come off mute and ask your question or make any comments to Lindsay, since you know a lot about the community there in El Paso?
Oh, hello. Yes, last name is pronounced Calamia, and thank you, Lindsay, for a wonderful presentation. I am not of that descent. I'm of Sicilian descent, but I know a little bit about the Syrian-Lebanese groups here, and they are very active, primarily on the west side of El Paso. They founded St. George's Orthodox Church here, and they have a very strong attendance. It's socioeconomically, it's a very well-off group, very, very well educated, and from a long line of merchants here. I have a question that I just placed is, do you, in the chat is, do you have an idea of why El Paso attracted most of the Syrian Lebanese immigrants in the state from 1880 to 1930?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That's all really fascinating to hear. And yes, you know, Akram, our center's director, when he was working on this documentary, went to El Paso and he just had a wonderful time there. I would imagine, and a big reason being that just the proximity to the border and being just a main border crossing. Um, that would be the major reason, I would think.
Entry point.
And
Yeah.
I know that some of them have also are closely intermarried with Mexican citizens there in Juarez. So that's also part of the history.
Certainly, yes. Yes. I mean, truly a lot of close ties there, frequent going back and forth across the border, as is today. But certainly the case where there would be work in both on both sides for people, for the Syrian Lebanese living there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question and for coming off of mute. Um, so there was a little a comment about, and I can't remember if you said pecan or pecan, and we might erupt into an argument here if we get too far into this, but folks wanted to know if you were from Texas.
Oh, I knew it. I had a feeling. When I was I knew this. I'm not. No, I'm from North Carolina. Um, I'm just an honorary Texan in my heart and soul. I just love Texas, but
I just thought that was funny, so I
I
had to comment on
that's
that one.
hilarious.
We also had Carolyn was mentioning that her mom worked at the Hager plant
Oh, cool.
and that the plant made uniforms for troops. So Rosie the Riveters were using their sewing machines to make pants for troops, which I thought was pretty cool.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you.
Let's see. There's a lot of love and gratitude for your presentation in the chat, Lindsay. So I hope before you hop off tonight, you'll have a chance to scroll through that. And okay.
Can I add something?
Yes, who's speaking, please?
Well, I'm Audrey Carroll,
Hi, Audrey.
K-A-R-I-E-L from Marshall, Texas. You did not mention Marshall, Texas, but I was chairman of the Historical Commission at the time when the Friends of Texas, the organization that you have, I'm 93. Forgive me, I don't want to ramble, but I did help form this organization and helped in East Texas. And I'm thrilled with what you have been, telling us today. This is wonderful, but you did not mention Marshall, and they had a very nice size group when I was chairman of our commission. We had about 5 years that we concentrated on the different ethnic groups that came to town. There was no one in the Lebanese group there. And I don't know, I guess theirs is, I believe, might be considered Lebanese, but maybe, I don't know the difference since I'm not in that group. But what we did was we did tell everybody that if they couldn't write their story, we would help them. But there was a man who was a former city commissioner, and he wrote it and did a beautiful job of the history. And I want to find out a way to be able to connect you with his information, because we ended up, well, so much of what you said kind of mirrored our community. And there were a lot of them in the food business. They had grocery stores. But then later on, there were some that became doctors and dentists. They were all friends of mine. I loved them all. And I have so much I can tell you, but I need someone who knows how to do oral history who can contact me. I'm very excited about this. The Institute of Texan Cultures was what really motivated me and a few others on our commission to look into this. And I'm so glad that we did now, because you don't even know about our group. They're a wonderful group.
So Audrey, thank you so much for drawing that to our attention. And I'm going to send an email tomorrow that has Lindsay's email address. So I'm hoping that you two will be able to connect that way.
Well, is there any way someone could call me? I do a little bit on email, but I am almost blind. And I
Maybe
can talk on the
maybe
phone.
so, Audrey. My only concern is I don't want you to give your phone number right now, since this is
no, I
going
won't.
out there to the world.
Oh, I don't want to do that.
So,
but anyway, Lindsay, I would love to talk to you or anyone else in this group who could access this material. I didn't realize at the time how important it would be. I want you all to know about my little East Texas town. I live in Dallas now, but I'm going back to Marshall in May, and I will most likely be talking to someone in that group, and I can tell them, I can connect you with the ones that are still there.
Audrey,
I know they would love
fabulous. That would be fabulous.
And when you mentioned El Paso, I think one of the group, I'd have to check with them to see, but it seems like one of them had El Paso connections. So I'm sure they were all connected in some way, but this was such a beautiful program. Thank you all so much for sharing it. And my daughter happened to see it and she knew I would be interested in it. But thank you so much for all you're doing. But where is the home base of this group? I missed that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Audrey, and thank you. Please say thank you to your daughter as well. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here. So we're the Jairala Center for Lebanese Diaspora Studies, and we're in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh, you're
Yeah,
far away.
we're far at North
Well,
Carolina State University.
the thing is, I don't know. It's just so weird. But there was someone in the Lebanese community who grew up in Marshall and who wrote, well, he became a friend, and we used to go out with he and his wife for dinner and some other folks. And he told me about writing an article about Marshall and how the different groups work together. And it really didn't matter that, way back there, they just all loved each other. And it was such a beautiful thing. I convinced him to put it in the Marshall News Messenger. It was an article he wrote. His name was Dr. Michael Ellis, Ellis. Anyway,
Thank you.
Anyway, I can't find that article, and it's on my bucket list. I want to find that article. It was so beautiful, and it's just like America is to me. We all seem to be able to get along. Well, sometimes we get along, but you don't know what this has meant to me tonight. It was such a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much for it. And Lindsay, I'll wait for you to contact me, or I'll contact you with my contact information.
That sounds wonderful.
Thank you for making my day.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. All right, we have another question from Ray Lynn asking, how did the center and the archive find its way to your university?
Yes, I know. It's an interesting story. So, back in 2012, there was a program established as part of the Department of History program, and it was just a Lebanese studies program. And in 2017, our director, Akram, worked with the center's funder, Moise Khairallah, and basically more or less got him to agree very generously to donate his money to NC State. Dr. Khairallah graduated from UNC Chapel Hill. And so and I believe he's mostly living in Lebanon these days. But he, I think, was just wanting to contribute to the local universities. And Akram Khater is just an amazing scholar on Lebanese migration. And so it was just a perfect fit. But yes, it is a little unexpected, perhaps.
It's a great question. I hadn't even
Yeah.
thought to ask that, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great question. Kathy Spear, are you on still?
Oh, yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah. Do you want to, I don't want to read your comment, but it's really interesting. I wanted to invite you just to come on and tell us about it.
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you
Okay.
so much for the opportunity. And I love the presentation. It's wonderful. So thank you so much. Yes, actually, my grandfather and grandmother came from Syria, and they had when they came here, migrated here to Texas, they opened up a fruit stand very similar to the Azar, I believe you showed us earlier. It was I live here in Laredo, Texas, and yeah, for many years he put his it's true what you said about, putting the children to work. They had 9 children, and all of them would work for the fruit stand. It was a fruit stand slash pecan stand. also where he would sell lots of bags of pecans. They would travel to the valley, like McAllen, Texas, Progreso, Texas, to go ahead and bring all the fruits and vegetables at night. And so it's really wonderful because I've always wanted to know a little bit more about my my grandfather's my father's family. And I used to have aunts that would come from Syria and uncles, and I unfortunately I never got to meet them. I they would speak just full Arabic, and when I was little, I wasn't interested, and I kick myself now because they would want to teach me the language, and I never learned it. And my grandfather would always tell me, come sit on my lap, let me teach you some words, and I would say no. And now that I'm an adult, I kick myself and I say, oh my goodness, there's so much that I wish I would have learned. And I only got to know how to make one dish, which is kibi, that I make every so often with lamb. But yes, it's wonderful getting to know this information. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That is
Yes.
lovely. Thank you. And I'm so glad, and thank you for your kind words. I think, yes, the idea of kind of kicking yourself, I think is a universal experience for sure of just the folly of childhood.
Yes.
But yeah, yeah.
Well,
And
thank you. That is such
Yeah.
a cool story about Laredo too, and that connection there. So I'm so glad that you, Kathy, I'm so glad that you put that into the chat.
Thank you all. No, thank you.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Donna Adair is asking, do you archive information about more recent immigrants to the area? The father of my daughter's now aged 40 best friend since middle school came from Lebanon. And secondary question, and do you connect at all with the Arab American Chamber of Commerce?
yes, actually, it's so funny you mentioned that. We had just a meeting with them just a couple weeks ago, I think, very recently with the American Chamber of Commerce. So yes to that. And yes, we do. We could collect more recent histories. Absolutely. That's something that we're trying to expand, actually. So much of our, existing research, and much of our existing collections focuses on this like first wave of immigration to the United States. But we are absolutely very much interested in collecting stories from, second wave, 1960s, 1970s through today. Really, even we're doing oral histories collection. We do it ongoing. So if any of you would like to, contribute, please reach out to me. And I mean, we're documenting oral histories with folks who from younger to older folks, just the whole spectrum of experiences. So yes, absolutely. We want it all.
Thank you, Lindsay. Um, Norman's asking about, again, we're kind of coming back to El Paso. I think there's a lot of curiosity about El Paso. Did the large population in El Paso have to do with the Lebanese finding it easier to come through Mexico? Were there quotas in the U.S. Customs? Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, I think yes. Well, I think it's related to the geographic location on the border. I think that's a huge, huge thing. Um, and I, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I don't know if it was just like a different cultural climate as compared to different places in Texas, in East Texas and stuff. I don't need to tell you all this, but obviously Texas is a very diverse place with lots of different kinds of communities. So, um, but I think that's a really excellent question. Yeah, I would think just by nature of the proximity to the border.
Something to look into more.
Yeah,
Find some more research for us on El Paso.
I know that's the takeaway here.
We need to know about El Paso. Um, there was some interesting discussion about an oil man who was a first generation Lebanese American who grew up in Beaumont. And then somebody asked the question, can you talk about the Syrian Lebanese involved in the oil industry in Texas?
Yeah, I can. Um, I know of one particular man, George, I believe first name George Cadane, and he immigrated and settled in Texas, and he ended up settling in Wichita Falls, but he acquired an oil rig, I guess, so to speak. I wish I knew the ins and outs of oil industry. But anyway, he was involved in the oil industry and profited heavily from it. So certainly there are cases where, folks of Syrian Lebanese descent were very much involved in the industry. So yeah, that's one, George Cadane. And he is mentioned in our online digital project as well. And we did an oral history interview with, I guess it must be maybe his grandson. Forgive me if Matt, if you're on here and I'm totally butchering this, which we'll be adding to our online oral history collections too. And he goes into the history of this family as well. So that's a great question.
Yes, I mean, as Texans, we are proud of our oil industry heritage, and there are a lot of folks very curious about the
Yeah.
history of all of that. So I can definitely see this being another piece of the puzzle that folks would love to know more about.
Mhm.
Well, we are approaching the end of our time together. If there, I wanted to say a couple of things before we close out. If you have additional questions that we weren't able to get to tonight, I want to encourage you to email Lindsay. Um, in my email that I will send to all of you tomorrow, I will include her email address and a link to the Texas Bound webpage. I will also include a link to the documentary that Lindsay will send me because I've already forgotten the name
Yes,
of it.
I know. There's a bunch of things. You'll have it all.
Send me all the
I
things,
will send
yes.
all of
And
them.
I will share that with all of you. And then somebody had asked about our next virtual event presentation. I'm so glad you did. I will include a link to that as well so you can register and learn more about the Asian American immigration story through Houston, which is what we'll be covering in May. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. You've all been a wonderful audience and had such wonderful questions. And I hope you'll be able to join us in May. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Thank you
Lindsay,
all so
before
much.
you go, make sure you scroll through the chat.
Okay, I will. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out so we can stop the Facebook Live. I'm going to email you, Lindsay.